Hi, everybody. I'm Kirsten McGregor, and I'm back to doing a resilience roundtable. I've had interviews with colleagues in stateside, but also in the Caribbean. And I've been doing this for a few months to start learning about what my colleagues do and introduce you to different ways of looking at resilience. And interestingly, today we are International Women's Day. So it's a shout out for working with other women and supporting women. I have Celia on today. I'm going to let her give her bio because I don't want to discredit anything because who knows what road I'll go down there. But just so everybody knows, the primary outlet and platform for this is LinkedIn, but it also streams to YouTube and Facebook. So if you're catching us there after the fact, the majority of the comments that I'm talking about that we'll leave on the bottom are on LinkedIn if you want to go back there. So Celia, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm going to quickly say how we met. Most of you know that I worked in the Virgin Islands for several years with the federal government, and I'm still working in the Virgin Islands with a client in St. Croix. But we've been working on some things and reconnected. And Celia's in St. John, but we met with my work when I worked with US EDA in the Caribbean. So Celia, thank you. And if you could tell, because I don't know the audience, because it's a big audience geographically, how you got to where you are in your current role in St. John.
All right. And Chris, thank you for having me, and thank you for providing this platform. And resilience is such an important issue that it's important to spotlight it in whatever ways you can. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And how I got here to the Virgin Islands, I've been in the Virgin Islands now for 20 years. In my stateside life, I was in advertising. Had gotten into advertising because that was what my dad did, and I thought he was the smartest man on earth. So I wanted to follow in his footsteps. But it was funny, when I got out of college, I had 2 degrees, one in journalism, advertising, and then one in business with marketing. And so when I graduated, I was Miss Cocky. I went out to the advertising agencies and said, okay, who wants me? And they all just kind of laughed and said, come back in 5 to 10 years and we'll consider you. So I went into working at a radio station, a TV station, a newspaper, and a magazine. And then I went back and said, okay, this is what I want. And I got into the Southeast hottest shop in Jacksonville, Florida, and loved my time there. But it was, and throughout the thread of this whole conversation, from who I am and where I got to be, and the whole resilience conversation, it's really all about networking and facilitating relationships, which of course LinkedIn is a big part of that as well. Same kind of message. But what I would do, and this was before the days of internet, I would go to the Red Book of advertising agencies and pick the third man down and just call and say, hey, I need some advice and direction. And they would always let me in, and they would always give me advice. And it was one more person that I had a connection with. And that's how I ended up landing in the advertising world. And then eventually I ended up starting my own advertising agency in Atlanta and loved it. It was fabulous. At the same time, I was doing nonprofit work for a senior care facility. It was inner city seniors, and we would go around, we would do Meals on Wheels, we would pick them up, and I was on their board. And as a board member, the executive director would report to us, but we didn't go in and dig deeper into the details, and we should have, because the taxes and that kind of thing weren't paid. So I jumped in as interim director. And long story short is, between balancing the advertising agency and running a nonprofit, complete burnout. So I decided that I was going to move to the Caribbean, I was going to sail, I was going to write, and I wasn't going to be defined by my career anymore. So I moved out of the Caribbean, and for a couple of years I sailed and I wrote and I did a few things. And then as fate would have it, I just navigate back into the world of marketing and nonprofit. And I ended up as a director for the St. John Community Foundation. One of the things and one of the reasons why I had taken over the directorship down in Atlanta at that agency was because I said, hey, writing a grant can't be that much different than writing a marketing proposal. So, and so when I came here, and I ran into a couple nonprofits here that needed some help, so I was doing a little bit of that as well. and then was a director at the St. John Community Foundation for 10 years. And 7 years into that job, we had the storms. And it was two Cat
For
5.
people, I'll have to interrupt though, for you, right. For people who don't know, 2017, I just want to make sure, because people don't necessarily know what those storms are. So yeah, if you could expand.
Yeah, the 2017 storms were 2 Category 5 hurricanes that direct hit on our little island, which is 9 miles by 2 miles, and it literally destroyed 80% of this island. The territory is also made up of three actually, other islands that were also affected, but St. John really got hit. And as the foundation, we ballooned into a resource and a space where we were facilitating some of the recovery funds. So we went from a couple $100,000 a year to millions, and just kind of spearheaded we were part of VOAD, and this is where you had asked this question once earlier. VOAD is Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, and it was actually formed in 1969 before FEMA. And FEMA actually got their calling card from VOAD because they saw all the volunteer organizations reacting to the storm in Texas in '69 as a unified front. And then the government agency said, "Hey, that's a pretty good idea. Let's do something like that." And then FEMA was born. But what we did is, St. John is unique in the fact that it's not only small, but it has a disproportionate number of wealthy individuals. But I would say, and I would have to go to every meeting over in St. Thomas and say, "Hey, we are not the rich white island with streets paved with gold. We are, 3% of the people have the money, half of them don't live here full time, and the rest of us are fighting paycheck to paycheck. Yes, we do have homeless people. Yes, we do have people that are out of work. Yes, we do have businesses that are struggling." And so that was just a story that I had to keep telling over and over and over again. But so when it came time for VOAD to be developed down here, I said St. John needs its own, because the plan for St. Thomas is not going to work for the plan for St. John. Back in Maryland and Hugo and some of the other big ones, all services are cut off our island because they all come into St. Thomas and have to come over to St. John by boat. But if ports are closed, we're out of luck. So that was the whole part of that. And then, right after this, a couple of years after the storms, we're getting ourselves rebuilt. We're getting everybody kind of back to a new kind of normal. Still have blue tarps on the roofs and still have infrastructure things to do. But then COVID struck, and it was a whole new ball game of challenges and efforts. And tourism stopped. The employment issues were real. And so there was a bigger need for the businesses and the business community to get support. So I shifted out into reopening my business, where I'm a business consultant and help guide businesses. And then ran into, at some point, the Small Business Development Center, and they said, "Hey, we need a St. John office." Because again, they've been operating for decades in St. Croix and St. Thomas, but in order for a St. John small business owner to go over and get face-to-face counseling, they would have had to, it's a boat ride and a ferry ride and half a day that most mom and pop businesses, small businesses who need the support, can't afford as far as timing goes. So
not necessarily the ones with the villas. I think that's an interpretation of St. John. Yes. And perception is reality in many cases. However, that doesn't mean that the people who need the help should be completely, discarded. You did bring up a few points I want to follow up on, especially for just the audience in general. I thought I loved it. It was so relevant. So many of the calls I've had recently about grant writing, and just before I had a call with someone in Delaware, and yesterday a call with a group of people actually about how the work that we do, whether you're working on broadband or you're working in disaster recovery or you're working on economic development, so much of it now is about building relationships that you inferred, right? About building those relationships. But the grant writing, it's not rocket science, but it does take a special skill set. It's not like everybody can do it, especially if it's necessary to be compliant and then also be competitive. So I just wanted to bring those points up and how important what you just said. And I think it's resonating with a lot of places with all this ARPA money, and a lot of people just they didn't realize how challenging that type of work would be, grant writing, grants management. But it ultimately comes down to building those relationships over time and staying in touch with people like you and I have.
Yeah, and it's also, and this is what happened when I took over went from a board position to the interim director for that senior services organization, was I said, hey, writing a grant is literally telling the story of how you're going to spend somebody's money. You give them the who, what, where, when, why, and how, but then you have to go back and you have to see exactly what their point and purpose is and make sure it matches.
You hit the nail on the head. What
Yeah.
you might want might not be what that funder wants. So you need to make sure that you're telling a compelling story for them to give you money, but also make sure they have their mission and their vision and their, priorities. So it's basically sometimes tweaking a little to make sure that they align. And that's the hard part, for sure.
That is, but it's usually well published as to what they need, because they have to answer to their people. Somebody gave them the money, so they've got to answer to those, either whether they're donors or another government agency or someone else. They've got to answer to them, and literally it's a matter of following directions and really listening. And it helps if you develop that relationship with those funding sources so you can ask questions like that. But yeah,
I think, well, and that's true too, that question. I think that sometimes things get very complicated, whether it's federal funding or philanthropic funding. And there's different agencies and things change over time, but without having a strong understanding of how they work, or being able to talk to someone in an agency or family foundation or whatever, it's having that relationship where you will be in a better place to understand what they're getting at. Because a lot of times they give you the flat speech. So I think that's important too. I wanted to bring this up. My last Resilient Roundtable was actually with Steve de Blasio, and talk about relationships. I think that's how we actually met, though, was I worked with Steve on Hurricane Sandy. He was the big guy in charge for FEMA there in New Jersey. And we stayed in touch, not, like once in a while type of thing. And then I literally ran into him on the main drag there in St. John. And then he told me about you, but I already had a meeting on the books with you, I think. So that's how funny St. John is. It's a small world. Yeah.
Steve de Blasio is just a get it done guy. I mean, he literally wrote the book on disaster recovery.
He did.
After literally wrote the book. And so he knew exactly what he was talking about. And then after our storms, and we wanted to shift from a VOAD-COAD stance to long-term recovery. And he's the one that suggested that we form our work groups after the RSFs, the recovery support functions. So then after the storm and after the immediate recovery, we could still trace and track our efforts around potential funding from the government through the RSFs. I mean, he's just brilliant.
It works. And I consider myself so fortunate to have learned under him. And Sandy was the first major rollout of the National Disaster Recovery Framework, of all those different RSFs that you mentioned. And that's why I actually, with anything, I've tweaked it a little bit for myself, but that framework works. It's a little different, but the different recovery sectors, but also looking at the different phases. And on my website, I made a graphic of the different phases of recovery and resilience response, because I think people think they're all the same thing, and they're not. No. And that's why you do need response people, you do need recovery people, and they need to collaborate and work together. So I had to mention that, since St. John is small, 4,000 people?
Yes.
And 2/3 of it is national park. I am
Exactly.
going to ask you about St. John because it is paradise. It is lovely, not without its challenges when you live there too. I mean, you mentioned uh, unlike St. Thomas or St. Croix, you can't fly in there. I guess if you're wealthy enough, you could bring a helicopter maybe, but you can't. I mean, it's that ferry, and something I had learned not by talking for economic development on St. John during the pandemic was that restaurants were closing earlier, and then it wasn't because there was a mandate. It was because the ferries closed at a certain time, so the workforce couldn't get back to St. Thomas. So anyway, I just wanted to have you give your take on, first of all, living in paradise. I'm sure it is lovely, but sometimes I want to punch people and they're like, oh, must be hard, right? Because it actual working and getting work done, you can't be drinking all day and going to the beach all the time. I'm sure it's great to have that right there at your footsteps. But so why don't you give the audience a little taste of what living and working in St. John is like?
Yeah, and and it is all about balance. I mean, I was a complete workaholic in the States, and that's one of the reasons why I moved to the islands. It's like I don't want to be not identified by work and have to be working all the time. And so when I came here, yes, and there's some things that are a lot harder to do here. Like for instance, you have to go over to St. Thomas to shop at reasonable prices. Something as simple as like a sleeve of salmon burgers is $27 here.
Yep.
On St. Thomas, it's $17.
Yep.
So you go over to St. Thomas to do shopping. Since COVID, it opened up the doors to government agencies and meetings being done online, whereas before it was never done. And if you wanted to be a part of a meeting, it would literally, for a 2-hour meeting, it would be a 5-hour event to get over to St. Thomas and taxi and ferry and then get to the meeting and do the meeting and come back. And now you can do it online, which is great. My rule of thumb, just to maintain that balance, is to get up and swim and hike in the morning before everybody gets to the beaches, and then oxygen to the brain, and then you can sit in your office all day if you need to. So there is that balance, but there's also the wind blows strong and the power goes out. Yes. Because we don't have our own power generating plant. It's over in St. Thomas, and it comes by cable over the water. So when it came time to getting everything back up, I mean, it took 6 months and more in some areas on St. John to get power and all utilities and everything fully restored after a storm.
I don't think people can
fathom.
Yeah, fathom it. Like my son freaked out last night because it was windy and he was afraid the power would go out and not have Wi-Fi for his YouTube videos, thinking, and we've been without power for 3 or 4 days because of a tornado. I mean, I just could not imagine being in that. Of course, I talked to enough people down there to hear their stories, but even things like charging your cell phone to be able to communicate. I mean, and it's not safe either, right? So I think that leads me to the other question about why it is important to support St. John, not taking away from St. Thomas or St. Croix or Water Island as the fourth island I think you were referring to. But there are enough economic development initiatives where we can be attracting business and private investment for the territory in general by having a focused St. John approach. And I do think you need to focus on small businesses, but I think looking at even just the tourism industry, that quality of life, this, I think I saw yesterday, this wastewater, something happened in Cruz Bay, or anyway, these things
for years.
There's so many things where St. John, just because they have villas there, you do need to have workforce to support that tourism industry, and then you need those ancillary services to support those. So I was wondering, with your work with the Small Business Development Center, and for those who don't know, that's funded through the Small Business Administration, and we worked with them closely on a number of initiatives, but we met with them in St. Thomas. So how does that work in your new role on St. John, and what kind of things are you working on to support St. John?
Well, as far as small businesses, I think, again, COVID, first the storms, which knocked everybody to their knees and was an equal equalizer. I don't care if you were a rich villa owner or, somebody on the homelessness. Nobody had power. Nobody could charge. Everybody had to work together. And where there was food, then somebody would be cooking, and then everybody was getting meals no matter how well off you were. So it was a good equalizer, and for the moment it was good. And then when as we started to recover, and then COVID struck, then again employment was affected. The tourism dollars was halted because nobody could come in, and we're still kind of reeling from the housing market, where and nothing bad about FEMA, but they had a pretty high per diem per day, and a lot of the people that were renting to your bartenders and your servers and your housekeepers, they said, oh, I can get this much per day as opposed to what you're giving me per month. So you're out, these guys are in. And a lot of people had to leave. A lot of the businesses had to close because they were mom and pop and couldn't sustain themselves. So during COVID, a lot of people that had gotten upset after the storms and were getting further upset as far as in their financial stability and their professional world, started thinking, okay, what would I really want to do? If I can't count on this company or this business sustaining me. So if I was really going to work hard, what would I do? And so that's what, I've got a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs that said, I've always wanted to do this business. If not now, when? And so they had some of the stimulus money coming in, and they had a breather to say, wow, okay, this is what I want to do. And then some of the businesses themselves were like, okay, this is where I've fallen down before. How can I improve? I've got a minute. I can pay my employees for right now, and I can get the CIDL loan. What do I want to do to make this business better if I've got these funds to sustain myself in this emergency, this disaster?
You bring up such a good point. Even for, I know I'm thinking, as when I originally asked the question was, existing residents of St. John and being more entrepreneurial. And I think that's happening nationwide. We're seeing people now want to be independent, work from wherever, because now it's more normalized than before the pandemic, and that's nationwide. But I think we're seeing an increase for a number of reasons, even with women, because they weren't able to keep their job and also take care of their kids during homeschooling. So there's a lot of iterations of that, and I could see that in St. John. But what was occurring to me as you were talking was, as you know, I do a lot of island work, and some islands actually had a strategy during the pandemic to, come here, work remote here. And that could be something, and especially for St. John, you have to look at all the housing that you mentioned before. But that is a way to attract entrepreneurs and investors to the territory. But I think, like, looking at that St. John environment is different. It's not better. It's different than St. Thomas and St. Croix. So I think having, and if anybody can't tell, our minds have been bubbling about this for a while. We've got some ideas to work on, so we'll see if they happen soon here. And I can't wait to come back and see you. But I do think, first of all, it's great that SBDC is in that space in St. John, and there to support the entrepreneurs and businesses that are there. I've gone to my SBDC in Delaware for help with my business. It's some of this stuff, depending on what direction you're going to, it's if you don't know what you don't know.
It's an amazing resource, absolutely. And the trainings that are available, even if you just go to the SBA Facebook page and they recount all the different trainings that they do several trainings a week, and you just go through subject line by subject and pick what you might want to work on. And they've got some really good information, and each city, each geographical area that makes sense has an SBDC, and it's usually sponsored by the university in that area. So it's an amazing resource.
You brought up sailing, and it's funny because people think I'm a sailor, and I probably should ask to be paid in sailing lessons. I almost, but for timing, it didn't work when I was living on St. Croix. Was gonna get lessons, but it didn't work with the timing of the contract. But I've been working on so many different islands, and then also working on the blue economy. So those would be coastal economies, not necessarily limited to islands. Um, and people just assume that I sail, and I would
Right.
love to. I'm just I am working in that space in the Virgin Islands. What does that space look like to you now? I've seen, and there's been a lot of things with chartered vessels, and then of
Mhm.
course the cruise ships are that which go to St. Thomas, but I think they give a lot of business to St. John. What is your opinion on how that's growing there?
It's a big part of our economy. Whether I mean, just in the last 2 years, I've assisted 3 new charter companies in starting.
Wow.
One of them was a woman who was a captain for another charter company, and they let her buy one of their boats, and she struck out and did her own business. And she has now acquired another boat, so she's got a catamaran and a power boat, and it's not only good for individuals, but it's good overall. But like
Yeah.
you said, the cruise ships don't come here for the most part. Sometimes they anchor right outside of us. They're just not allowed to anchor in the national park, and there's so much national park around us.
Sure.
But they'll ferry their folks in to do business and take them to the beach, and then have a day trip over here. So it is very important.
Yeah.
And I just see it getting bigger. I wish, and I'm hoping that since when BVI was closed during the COVID, all the charter companies realize, hey, we don't need to go outside of the Virgin Islands to have a good time with our clients and customers. And so it really boosted our economy. Back in the 60s, we had an opportunity to get the moorings and that charter business that went to BVI, but for whatever reason, turned it down at the time. So now,
And
yeah.
that's why you need the infrastructure in place, but and the governor signed an MOU and has to do with the Jones Act. Now, devil's in the details on those things, but I mean, the charter vessels, these yachts, yacht manufacturing, boat build. I mean, just maintenance, and then that goes back to workforce and having the workforce to support those vessels, whether that's hospitality or actual shipbuilding itself. And I think that could be huge for all islands. But for
Absolutely.
St. John, I just know that there's a lot, and I haven't seen the numbers. I mean, I know the Yacht Haven Grand is in St. Thomas and has the yachts there. I mean, so it makes sense. But I just feel like there's a lot more charter vessels in
Yeah.
St. John. Maybe it was just because I was constantly meeting sailors, but
Well, on the even more basic level, the whole workforce development end of things. When I was at Foundation, we got a grant through the Department of Labor for workforce and career skills development, those kind of things. We would do job shadows, and this one kid wanted to be an engine mechanic and a marine engine mechanic. So we got him a job shadow on one of the barges. And again, I use that phrase, long story endless, is that during his job shadow position, and the captain took him down into the engine room and everything and showed him everything, but then also took him up to the wheelhouse and let him drive. And then a year later, I saw him taking money on the car barge. And I'm like, good for you. You got a job with the car barge. And he's like, yeah. He said, I'm going to study for my captain's license. That kid at 36 is now driving the car barges.
wow.
And it's things like that. You get them interested early on, and that whole networking and communication and facilitating relationships. It'll go far. And that when we did that same thing, we were telling the kids, because if you look for a job on St. John and you look in the newspaper, you're not going to see it. You're not going to see it. So what we did with them is said, okay, this is the kind of work you do. What are the businesses on St. John that are doing that kind of work? Start building a relationship with them. What in any way related to that can you do? And the businesses were happy to be a part of it because they say they can never find good help. And it's like, we have to work together to have you train the kids to become the people that you want to hire.
Well, and then I think sometimes where people don't think it goes back even further for this industry, for example. I think that they've been trying to encourage in the K through 12 school system for that pathway there. And this is actually good for safety, is swim lessons for, and if you're living on an island, you need to learn how to swim. A lot of the students the children do not know how to swim. But I think it was originally thought of because they couldn't hire people who couldn't swim.
Right.
But of course, that's now the initiative is bigger safety. But then go ahead.
There's another program, the swim program, but it's also CATS, Kids in the Sea, that was started simply because there were some kids out in the boat, a Boy Scout troop that several of them didn't make it when they overturned. So they started this Kids in the Sea program, and kids start at the very beginning. I was a CATS instructor, and what we would do is we'd take them out in rowboats and teach them how to paddle and teach them how to flip it over, because what's the worst thing that could happen in a boat? Because you turn over. So we're going to turn you over and show you you don't have to panic and freak out. This is how you get out of that. And they work up from canoes to opties to sunfish to, just all the way up the line up until they get into the icy 24. So it's a great way to get them acclimated to water and working on the water.
Yeah. And I think that that's an important component, is looking at that youth, that pipeline there. Because the other thing about Virgin Islands, and this is true for a lot of islands, so I don't want to say it's the VI, it's not, but the transient population, of course, I was called transient, or I was even called a commuter at one point, that they come in and they stay for a season or stay for a year, young people, and then they go back stateside. But or also the flip to that is you have Virgin Islanders who then go on to school, university stateside, and then maybe only come back for holidays. And I think that there's that for both, trying to figure out how to work with those transients, but also how can you keep them from leaving, and working with, I act like an honorary resident of the VI. How can we work with our college students, if they do go stateside, to get them back home? And I know that there's programs, actually the Virgin Islands Research Tech Park, they have a program just to bring entrepreneurs and labor talent back to the VI, and also help them find work, and even the spouses. So if they're not a Virgin Island but you're married, come back to the VI and try and find the appropriate work. So there are some programs out there, but you're going back to the St. John, they're not going to advertise on paper. That's the thing that I learned too, with 4,000 people. You really just had to keep going out and just put it, really just having to get out and meet people and constantly be talking to people, and authentically, right? Because I think there's that trust thing too, because you guys have, and I would like your input on this. You guys have so many people like me, not like me, because I'm me, but consultants coming in, right? You had Bloomberg. I mean, I know that they're based there, but I'm just you have so many people coming in, and a lot of them do good work, but they come in and they leave. So how is that when you have, I'll tell you how I dealt with it as a consultant there, but how does it feel to be there and then constantly have consultants coming in? And I'm going to leave it at that because I don't want to put.
A lot of times it feels like we have to start over with every new consultant comes in and retell the story, that they're not here long enough to take what we were working on through to fruition. There are still things that FEMA was working on and Kickstarted that were great projects, but we still need support with, that don't have the capacity to complete on our own. So that's a big one. And the other is, investing. It comes almost to a point of apathy when people come in and they're like, we want to help you. And it's like, yeah. In a year and a half, you're not going to be here. You're not going to remember all the stories that we told you and everything that we need. And so, do it.
And that's, I saw it as a consultant. Now, granted, I mean, I did live there, not, but I've been, it was all my life for 2.5 years. And I did go back and forth, obviously, because I have a child. But I saw consultants coming in and the same feeling, like starting over, and I'd be like, "You don't think we thought of that? Of course we thought of that, but it's not gonna happen." But everybody wants to take they can do it, but I learned early on that it was a complete change in approach to be much more curious and listen and not give all my advice. Because of course I have, just like you do, from your years of experience, you have best practices and you know stuff, but you just know it. But I learned the flip was to listen, because the people who live there know that better than you. And then once you absorb, you really start hearing what those problems and challenges are over time, and then gain that trust too. Then you'll be in a better positions on both sides to execute that work,
Yeah,
and
and
the
it goes.
ideas.
Yeah, and it goes back to the old saying that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And
Yeah,
it's like you can come in
exactly.
knowing everything, but who
Yep.
cares if you don't know who we are? And there were times, even the VOAD manual, they were like, well, this is the way we do things, but they say that you can alter it to each unique community. And it's like, okay, this is that situation. This is a unique community. We're not one state, the Virgin Islands. There's
Right.
the St. Croix plan, there's the St. Thomas plan, and there's the St. John plan and Water Island plan. So no, we're not going to have one plan for the territory. So let
How
go of
did
that.
that how did that work too? We didn't I mean, you touched on it earlier for a little bit about VOAD, which I must have heard that before about VOAD before FEMA.
Yeah,
Um, I almost made some jokes there, but I have a lot of FEMA connections here.
yeah,
But, you did work on that long-term recovery
yeah,
group, and I think that's I mean, we were met at St. John Foundation, but I
yeah.
think where we kinda connected professionally was on that work. What did you learn from that? And maybe for yourself, and how you work about being resilient, because it wasn't just about recovery,
Uh-uh.
but resilient. And I'm sure you learned just a ton about working with
Oh.
different groups and different people and all sorts of things.
Well, and like you said, it's a matter of listening to people and making sure that they know that you know what their mission is and why they're involved. They're not there just to help you, they're there to help their mission. And if you can give them the platform and the relationships and the access to the people and the agencies that can help their mission, then they'll do whatever they can to help you. And
Yep.
that's basically what it was with, like National VOAD has over 70 really of the nation's most reputable nonprofits, from Red
Yep.
Cross to American Cancer Society, Humane Society, all of the religious organizations that have the rescue and disaster units. It's amazing. And when we couldn't get something through, whether they had, and this is before the storms, I would call up these organizations and say, hey, you don't have a Virgin Islands rep. And they're like, well, if a disaster ever happens in the Virgin Islands, we'll get one. And so then after the storms, we said, okay, you still don't have a Virgin Islands rep, but we would be more than willing to facilitate, somebody coming down and, helping us out. But if you can't come down, this is what we need. Help us get it.
Yep.
And it worked. It worked. It worked in a lot of respects. And the whole business continuity thing is, I jokingly say, because we do COAD every month at the local level in St. John and again at the territorial level. And I used to say, voluntary organizations active in disaster. And they're like, well, we don't have a disaster right now. And I'm like, okay, we'll call it voluntary organizations active and determined, because you have to, during the blue skies, you have to figure out how you're going to mitigate any potential damages. You've got to build your resilience. You got to be prepared. You've got to tell everybody and educate everybody what they need to do in their business to keep it strong and sustainable during a storm, and what they have to plan for. Same with families. So, yeah.
Well, this just I have my water bottle here, learn
There
from
you
myself.
go.
And
Listen is strong.
they sent me a backwards here
Nice.
from St. John
Yep.
for donating money. I guess it was, a thank you.
Yeah.
It's such a pretty sticker, reminds me of the VI.
Yeah.
But my point was, when you were talking, I noticed that, with my ADD, like, oh my God, squirrel.
Squirrel.
Was that groups like that, and we know that there were family foundations there too. I think I mentioned Bloomberg, but that did attract, and I'm sure there's challenges with all of that, but I saw a lot of the community come together, and it was great to see that nonprofit foundation leadership there, especially for such a small territory.
Yeah.
Or small island within the territory.
Absolutely. There's still a large amount of hand-holding and cheerleading they need to do. I mean, people, for the most part, know what needs to happen. But being able to take the time to make that happen when it's not really, really, really focused on their particular mission, but we can't do it without them. Yep. It takes a little bit of sacrifice as well, and a bit of working together. There's the 4 C's of the VIVOAD, which is communication, coordination, collaboration, and cooperation. And they're all different. It sounds a lot like we're just saying the same word over again, but it's not. There's a lot to happen, and sometimes you have to feed the fire and handhold, but it's worth it, because once you get everybody together and sitting at the table, we would have hundreds of people coming to our community update meeting, and because they had something to say and they wanted to hear what other people were saying and how it might affect them.
And if for anything, I mean, obviously I've worked all over the country. I noticed in St. John, you guys do come out. I mean, there were some issues on the other side. I don't know. Actually, I don't even, I'm assuming you're in Cruise Bay. But on Coral Bay, there were some things that came up, and I don't want to get political or anything. But I mean, the people came out and they care, but they came from different perspectives, and I felt like everybody was so respectful of each other too. I mean, I'm sure that doesn't happen all the time. But
for the most part, it is very, very civil, and even when it's a volatile issue like the cultural sustainability aspect of things. We had a group called St. Janko. They did a film about and why the relationship between the national park and some of the locals is not as tight as they would think, because there was this whole issue of condemnation when Rockefeller came in, and they got that people were giving them their property, or they were buying property. Then there was this point where it's like, okay, we're going to turn this into the rich white man's playground. And okay, we'll take this property and this property. And there was a governor, or a man in the Senate, Mr. Moorhead, that said, absolutely not. And the community came together and said no, and they won. But still, they've got that underlying ouch. And we had a film that was done about that whole issue. And there were 2 showings, and the early showing, well, there was only going to be one. But it was very interesting to see who showed up early, and then a lot of the West Indian and older population came in, and they couldn't fit in venue. Wow. So they said, okay, we're going to have a second one. And I stayed at both, because they had a panel and they had a discussion afterwards. And the discussion after the first round was the people in the audience telling these local culture bearers, well, this is what you should do, and this is what you should do, and why didn't you do this, and why don't you do this? And then the second round was the culture bearers talking to their peers, saying, how do we do this? Yep. And they said, you take ownership of your businesses and stop renting them to the people that aren't doing culturally sensitive businesses, and you step up and do it. Yep. And it was just a real honest conversation, and it was beautiful.
Well, and consensus building is so hard. And I often say the work that, I mean, I know we do different things, but it's obviously complementary to the work that we do. If it was easy, then anyone could do it, because it does take some endurance, but care. I think that's the other thing that I've always noticed about you, very empathic, always just, I felt like we were friends one of the first times we met. So, and you just can tell an old soul that way. We're getting close to 45 minutes here. So, did you want to talk about any, I know the SBDC is a big part of what you're doing. Is there anything with your business or anything else that you're working on, even if it's a philanthropic initiative that you'd like to fill everybody in on as we wrap up here?
Well, one of the things that I found very important that hadn't been done before is people hadn't been looking at nonprofits as businesses, and they are. They're corporations, they are run like businesses, even though the nonprofit side of that goes back into the service provision as opposed to regular profits. But nonprofits are businesses and they need to run like them. And so that's a big focus of what I'm doing. And I'm territorially handling nonprofits as well. And so NGO support is very important. And I think that the message to entrepreneurs and small businesses and nonprofits is if you're struggling with anything, reach out to the SBDC and ask, because they have a multitude of experts, different field and field experts. And they'll, if they can't answer the question, they'll find somebody that can help answer the question. And just
you hit the nail on the head there, because so many of the I was on a nonprofit earlier. I mean, she was talking about best practices in Alaska, you know, because everybody has their own network too, to see how things might work where you are, right? So I think that's key. Well, I'm hoping that our scheming works, that we have a project that we can work together. It looks like it may come together, so pray that, because I'd love to see you and see actually a number of colleagues down there in St. John, but also in St. Thomas and St. Croix. So I just wanted, I'll put the link to your website in the comments below so people can reach you, or if you want to give anything else that you want to have for people to email or whatever. And for my company, SAGX Associates, it's sagxassociates.com, and you can sign up for our newsletter. I'll have that in the comments below as well. If you are interested in being a guest on this Resilient Roundtable, I need to be better about doing them monthly, but I am open. I don't have a interview scheduled yet. There's some people who have reached out to me, but please message me and we can see if that would work out. But that's pretty much it for today. I know everybody's so busy right now. It's a good, I call it a champagne problem. There's all this money out there that we all need to be working on, but there's some good stuff, and it's always good to work with good people like you. So thank you, Celia, for taking the time and supporting St. John and the Virgin Islands.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate you, and I love the work that you're doing. Keep it up, and I look forward to working.
All right. Thank you. All right, everybody. We'll see you soon.